Prof. Maloka, I think it's quite important that we get started with fundamentals. When we speak about collective security, what that means exactly, and maybe crucially, does the African Union currently provide anything comparable to the security guarantees offered by the AU or NATO to their member states? Over to you, Prof.
No, thank you very much, madam. Thank you very much for inviting me and also for associating me with this important platform. And also let me also join you in recognizing everybody who's here, including our sister, the fellow panelist from Kenya, and everybody who's here, and to say thank you for being here. As to the question that you are asking, let me answer it this way. Collective security means, of course, within the context of interstate relations, means that do we have a mechanism that enables a community of countries to adopt a collective posture towards an external threat, to defend themselves or something like that? That's my understanding of collective security. Do we have that in the African Union? Yes, we do have it. We have an architecture. We have it started, in fact, during the OAU days with this conflict. It was called the OAU conflict mechanism and so on, which was established in 1993. But it was domestically, it was oriented towards the continent, towards dealing with conflicts on the continent, dealing with prevention and mediation and all of that. But what happened when we set up the African Union? We then developed a comprehensive collective security architecture. Remember that the African Union, and it's something that I wanted to clarify, not to respond to, which is in your question. The African Union is similar to the European Union. It's not. It's not another version of NATO. NATO is it's a military alliance, and its members have. It's more like a mutual, something similar to a mutual defense pact that you get bilaterally, some countries or a group of countries. So the mutual, those kind of defense pact, they say we defend each other, and if any of us is attacked, then all of us are attacked. That's Article 5 in the NATO statute. So the African Union doesn't have that kind of regime. Instead, what we have the peace and security, what we call the peace and security architecture. The peace and security architecture, you know that at its apex is the Peace and Security Council. Then you have its various other bodies. You have the Panel of the Wise. You have the Panel of the Wise. You have the African Standby Force. You also have the regional economic communities. They are part of the peace and security architecture of the African Union within the framework within the framework of what is called the principle of subsidiarity. So if there is a conflict in West Africa, the region that is nearest to it is the one that is responsible for it. So then you'll see ECOWAS leading. If it's something in the Horn, IGAD is leading. If it's something in Southern Africa, then you see SADC is leading. If it's in Central Africa, you see that ECAS is leading. Sometimes you have also complementary bodies like the ICGLR in the Great Lakes region, and so on. So we do have a collective security architecture. That's the point I want to say, and it takes the form of it's quite comprehensive. It's not just on security. Remember, the African Union, as I said, is more similar to the European Union. So our core it's an integration. It's a political union for integration, and our integration agenda is in the three core pillars: development. And under it, you have all these institutions and legal instruments, including CFTA, NEPAD, and so on. Then you have governance, and this is where the APRM and others are. I'm no longer at the APRM. I left the APRM 50 months ago. So I'm former, if you have to associate me with the APRM. And then the PAP and all of that, they fall under the governance. Then you have the peace and security. So this is where the peace and security architecture. And then the African Union, we have this comprehensive as I said, we are a comprehensive, it's a political union, quite comprehensive. We coordinate our relationship at a global level. As a continent, we coordinate. Like, for example, we consult among each other on who among African countries can represent, can sit on this. Africa has 3 seats on the Security Council, so we should rotate among African countries. So there's an established practice of consultation and rotation and all of that. It works 99% of the time. Sometimes it doesn't, but in the majority of cases, it works. So once the countries are at the AU level, then it becomes a formality at the UN when the elections take place. We also have a candidatures practice. So when there are vacancies in international positions and there's a vacancy for African countries go to the AU, submit their candidates there, and the AU goes through this process, and the AU will endorse one. It works in the majority of cases. There are exceptions. So we already have some sort of practice, and you could say even institutional arrangements, even institutional posture that enables us to take a collective posture towards the world, or adopt a collective posture towards the world. So it's beyond simply issues of peace and security. It also goes in terms of our role as a continent globally. And then in New York, as you know, our ambassadors there, they meet as the Africa Group, as well as in Geneva, they meet as the Africa Group to try to coordinate. They coordinate with other groups. They also coordinate among themselves how they are going to vote, how they are going to do this. So we've done quite a lot of work, especially under the auspices of the African Union. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure actually there are people really interested in the topic. There will be more questions, not only from me, but also just from the audience. We will see how we progress. I'm actually really pleased to see that Africa has that architecture. And for me, when you were talking about architecture, I see more just the framework. Yes, we do have that framework that we have for collective security. And I think really, my mind is still kind of turning to see how practical, the architecture is at the moment. So let's take one particular country. How do they benefit? And maybe let me address Ambassador Waringa on this to just see, yes, we do have, Prof said we do have the architecture for security and so on. And we know that the whole AU, it actually built on the principle of sovereignty and non-interference. Yet we are seeing quite a repeated case or cases, I would say, of regime destabilization, and we are seeing proxy wars, external military influence. And now, and maybe I'll take Kenya, I'm sure you are being the president of public service, you might be able to kind of bring this to perspective. What protection does AU, Kenya being the member of AU or any other member state, what protection does the AU membership, the membership of the AU realistically offer the African state when external interests are at play, like we are seeing proxy wars? Is there now really any protection to that? I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be hosted today on this very important and progressive conversation on how do we then amplify African voices a global space. Number one, I would want to say that Africa must not continue to be a recipient of ideas at the global level, but Africa must rise up to be the co-author of global solutions, whether in climate change, whether in security, whether in energy, whether in food security, the United Nations conversations. Africa must not continue to be a recipient, but we must be around as a continent to sit on the table of these global solutions discussions. Number two, Africa has been in the front line, having noted that we have beautiful and very progressive brains, human resource in the continent. In this regard, our policy framework as a continent, our level of diplomacy as a continent has been tapped. Actually, look at some of the UN solutions emanate from the continent of African desk. Some of the EU, even European Union progressive solutions comes from the African desk of governance. Some of the G20 actually progressive interventions emanate from the African desk. But one challenge that Africa we must rise to is the fact that away from giving to the global space, we must be able to implement these progressive diplomatic policies within our continent. One, I'm very much aware of the rich continent that we happen to be part and parcel of, and which we call home. From DRC to here, the Republic of Congo, to Nigeria, to South Africa, and other countries within the continent, we have been endowed with great resources, from energy to great forests like the Congo forest. Look at the amount of natural resources in the DRC, in Burkina Faso, in the Republic of Kenya, in South Africa. But what are we doing as a continent? We have a desk at the African Union that discusses on progressive interventions that must be undertaken to ensure that we sustain our African countries' GDP by utilizing the richness, the wealth that is found in our soil, the wealth of our brains, the wealth that is found within this particular continent. Or are we only giving to other G20 benefiting? For example, the G20 is benefiting from Kenya's M-Pesa, and we are aware of that. Is the African continent benefiting from the M-Pesa concept that is transforming the e-transactions of money? So I think we would do a very good proposal and a recommendation to the African Union. We must have a desk that discusses what benefits, what progressive benefits the continent can be able to benefit from without necessarily having, first of all, exporting the same, but first of all, ensuring that the continent is satisfied fully, so that we reduce on insecurity, we reduce on retrogression in democracy. Look at how our African continent is suffering. We have just ended elections in Uganda and Tanzania. Some of our election observers have given a report of some gaps existing in our electoral processes. Kenya is about to get to national elections in 1 year. My biggest responsibility right now as a presidential candidate is to try and fill the gaps that are existing in our electoral processes. Africa, we must sort out our electoral processes towards free, fair, and credible elections in the entirety of the continent. So many countries are talking of protection that Africa is offering out there, policy and diplomacy. And we have good papers at the African Union desk that advocate for trade, policies, for climate change policies, for development financing policies. But at what percentage can the African Union, share or tell us at what percentage is African countries benefiting from these progressive policies? So we would not want to sell too much. It's good to sell to our neighbors in the continent, Australia, the America, the UK, and all that. First of all, the African continent, how much are we benefiting from the knowledge, from the policies, from all progressive continental protocols that are in place to streamline governance, to streamline diplomacy, to streamline policy framework, to streamline trade in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that. How much Africa is benefiting? I think that is a very, very critical question that it's actually ongoing and we need to continue asking ourselves. So that's really just lead us to, and you were talking about the Africa desk, the African desk at the AU. And I remember that the African peer review mechanism, actually it was established, yes, as a system of self-assessment, peer learning, and mutual accountability. Now let me go back to Prof. We're just talking about the unending wars and conflict. And as we know, many of these conflicts are also driven by governance failure and competition over natural resources, which I think has a spillover effect that will threaten the security of the entire continent. I heard you earlier on, we do have an infrastructure. But I think just from you being the former CEO of the APRM, my question to you would be, within that framework of mutual accountability and so on, and you mentioned about the regional blocs, accountability, SADC and ECOWAS and East Africa, Central Africa, and so on. So can now the APRM play a more explicit role, understanding the dynamics of the continent, more explicit role by formally strengthening or recommending the obligations of that of the collective security? I think, in other words, what I want to say is that can the APRM evolve from just government review mechanism into a strategic pillar that help underpin Africa's collective security architecture that you mentioned?
It's sometimes it's tempting when we are sitting in a meeting and discussing the African Union to expect the African Union to do everything, maybe even including babysitting our children at home, breastfeeding them, and so on, to say it's depriving us of the milk, and so on and so on. For me, I take a more pragmatic view on this one. You can achieve a lot with multilateral bodies, but these bodies are limited by their nature. You have to remember that multilateral bodies are like burial societies, that you have, or social clubs that you have in communities. They don't exist in nature. It's a group of people who come and say, we want to form this body, maybe so that we, in French, they say we cotize, we contribute to form so that when one of us has lost somebody, we are able to support that person, or a social club to support each other around birthdays and so on. So multilateral organizations are the same principle, but the difference here is sovereign states. So sovereign states come together around the table and establish a self-help association of some sort. Like the African Union is some sort of a self-help. So they want to establish this United States of Africa. They want to support each other on this. But this is not it's not an either-or situation where, because you have the African Union, other agencies for change, let's say in countries, other agencies for change must now defer to the African Union to find solutions. So you must still do so. That's why when I look at the situation on our continent, there are things that the African Union, that APRM, that NEPAD can do, but those issues, those institutions are limited by their very nature because they are an association of sovereign members. I've emphasized sovereign. So you join voluntarily. Nobody has forced you to join. You join voluntarily, you have some expectations, but anytime you can pull out. And President Donald Trump is showing us an example of what can happen. So you can one day, your cabinet can take a decision, we withdraw from the African Union. Even some countries did it in West Africa, they withdrew from the ECOWAS. So when you deal with sovereign state, this kind of organizations, myself, I know when I was at the APRM, I was quite pragmatic. I knew I'm dealing here with an organization that is created by these countries that are sovereign. Any one of them can pull out of the organization. So there is a limit to what you can achieve with that organization. So the question is, it doesn't mean because we have IPRM, then women must stop fighting around issues of women, around the farmers must stop fighting. No, those agencies, those structures, those movements. So the APRM or the multilateral structures are just one frontier of the several frontiers that are available to us as Africans to change the direction of our continent, to deal with issues around elections in our own countries and so on. Let me give you an example of Ambassador Waringa was talking about election monitoring. Like I've participated in a number of them. When you go into countries as a multilateral body, as an election observer, it's not the same as if you, let's say, you were an NGO. There are some NGOs that send election observers. So when I'm in the NGO, I go there, I write whatever I write, I can do, and so on and so on. But when you are a multilateral organization, you have some responsibility because you are dealing with a sovereign state. And that panel is made up of representatives from various countries that are members of that body. So when they come there, we look at the constitutional provision of that country because we cannot impose certain things in a country that are not provided for constitutionally in that country. It's very, very important to. So you can't, if a country only, let's say, in its constitution only recognizes Islam as a religion, you can't go there and say, no, this country didn't do well because it doesn't recognize Christianity. So the way you do, you evaluate that country on the basis of its own constitution and legislative provisions. When you are a multilateral organization, then in your recommendations, you can then say best practice teaches us that you need to separate the state from religion. You need to allow. So these go into a but you can't even impose on that country. So there is a limit. It's something that I want to emphasize. There is a limit to what you can achieve with a multilateral organization because the members are there voluntarily, but they can always pull out. But then the African Union has a sanctions regime. APRM doesn't have a sanctions regime. So in the APRM, if a country doesn't want to do certain things, all we do is to appeal, is to advocacy and go there. But the African Union has a sanctions regime. But even the sanctions regime is quite narrowly defined. It's if you don't pay your fees, if you topple a government, and so on. But it doesn't apply to a number of other things. If, let's say, a country in Africa talks to Russia and sign a treaty with Russia, and then some countries feel in Africa that, no, you mustn't ever. So the AU can intervene. It has no mechanism to deal with that. You can't compel a country and say, no, you must have relations with this. So what I'm trying to say is that when you talk about the multilateral organization, what it can achieve, the multilateral, always remember that you are dealing with something similar to a self-help organization where members come and agree, they set up a constitution, they agree with their chairperson, they agree with this, they establish all these bodies, but membership is voluntary, anybody can pull out. So there is a limit to what you can achieve, but we have achieved a lot already. The fact that now the sanctions, they work around the payment of assessed contributions, countries now pay. They know that if you don't pay, there will be consequences. So countries pay, as opposed to during the OAU times, the arrears were quite huge. But at the lower level, like in the African peer review mechanism, countries were not paying. We didn't have a sanctions instrument. So that's why we went into the broader AU body. Around the non-indifference and non-intervention and all of that, the OAU, we had this thing of respect and recognition of state sovereignty and non-interference, and it didn't work. Now there's consensus, and now it is enshrined in the constitutive fact that there are circumstances where the community can intervene, and the community has intervened. And you have never anywhere on the continent, I've never witnessed any resistance today. It's just disagreement to say, no, we don't agree with what you are saying. We don't, like now in Guinea-Bissau, they had a situation around, now they have now come up with a 1-year timetable. They are working with ECOWAS. They are also working with the AU. So this is already enshrined and it's already in practice. It's progress. That countries now accept that the AU or these sub-regional bodies can come and interfere when there are certain instances in their own country. So they work with them cooperatively. They don't defy them. The situation in ECOWAS with those other countries is quite different because it's different of opinion and so on, and it led to irreconcilable differences around certain areas. But it's not fundamental. I believe they will come back at a certain point. So generally what I'm trying to say is that in as much as we put a lot of value on multilateral organization, the AU doing this, AU giving us milk, AU helping me with breastfeeding, AU helping me with exams in class, AU helping me with my child exams, AU help me. No, AU can do all those things. AU it's a voluntary organization. It can do so much. But it doesn't mean because the AU is there and has to do this thing, it doesn't mean we, women, youth, the trade union movement, farmers association, and so on and so. It doesn't mean that we must then defer our responsibilities to the African Union. We all have the responsibility to the lowest level to change the situation on our own continent. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I spoke too long.
No. I think that's definitely what people need to hear. And please, everyone, if you have any question, put it in a chat. I will, I will go to the chat and just read all the comments and questions. So don't worry, put all your questions. We're gonna go through them. So it's actually very important. I think it was clear for us to hear the perspective of the AU being a voluntary organization that cannot provide everything. So it's basically, everybody must be big boy, big girls to look after themselves, kind of, because we join, like you were saying, Prof, that, the keyword is sovereign. Everyone is joining voluntarily and they can also withdraw voluntarily. So now we are talking about, and I think earlier on you did speak about the African Peace and Security Council, which is the pillar for African peace and security architecture that is already there. Now, I think to both of you, Ambassador Waringa and Prof, this is really a critical question. In a recent global event, Prof, this will be linked to just what you say now. In a recent global event, from the rupture in the world order highlighted at Davos this week, to outright threat to territorial integrity, like we've seen in Venezuela, disputed tensions in Greenland, it reminds us that fragile, so basically it reminds us how fragile the sovereignty can be without collective protection. Those are my keywords. Now, the question to both of you would be, if, and I'm saying if, external forces were to directly challenge Africa's sovereignty or seek to take control of strategic resources, does the continent, do we possess that collective capacity or mechanism that we can respond effectively? Yes, I hear you, Prof. We are, everybody needs to be a big boy. But when the whole continent is challenged, do we have any strategic, strategic capacity or collective capacity on how we can respond? Because as much as we are 54, 55 countries, it's one piece of land. Over to you. Can I start with Ambassador Waringa? No, you are muted, Ambassador.
Am I audible now?
Yes,
very
we
well.
can hear you.
Beautiful. Our strongest point as the people of Africa is when our voices are united in diversity. As much as we have the Anglophone and we have the French-speaking nations and we have other nations, when our voices are united, when we come together as a people of the continent, then we become the strongest pillar that can resist any form of external threat, of external insecurity, of external, name it. So it calls for Africa to be alert now. With what is happening in Venezuela, in Greenland, praying about with the territorial integrity that has been given legally by the constitutions of these progressive nations. It is time that the continent of Africa, individual nations, without necessarily focusing on the African Union to do everything, come together and now discuss the strategic mechanisms, go through a very critical situation analysis of our capabilities and capacities and as a continent to be able to handle such. I know that I would say for the longest time, sometimes we have been relaxing as a continent and kneeling down so much on matters economic support, in terms of human resource support, in terms of infrastructure development support and everything. But dear ones, the continent of Africa is a continent that can be able to be self-sustained in terms of protecting its own territory, protecting its own territorial integrity, protecting the constitutionalism of our independent and individual nations, protecting our digital space that can be interfered with, because right now, many global wars are starting from the internet, from the digital space. So what matters is how strong or how strong are we? Are we global ambassadors? Are we continental ambassadors of our own territory? And what must we do if there exists a gap towards realization of that ultimate capacity to be able to protect the continent? What is there that we are doing? And I request, Madam, if we are able to host now another summit, if possible, discuss the critical action points towards protecting Africa from any territorial integrity threat or insecurity that may occur. And I request if we are able also to have like heads of states and also key representatives and policy makers from various individual countries' representatives, so that we also review our policies in that regard. Let us also have a meeting with our territorial security and intelligence spaces. How well are we able to detect war? How well are we able to detect threats? I'm sorry to say this, but look at what happened in Venezuela. Where was the power of intelligence? And all this happened. How strong is our continental intelligence? The other thing is how well are we able to establish funds, deliberate, strategic resource base to be able to protect the continent in case of an attack, in case one of our countries is under threat. And the most critical thing now, how well are we united as a country, as a continent, sorry, to be able to address any threat or attack that comes within our territories? Are we a united continent, or we are still struggling you continue struggling with our individual countries? You know, how well are we connected? And I think this is a very beautiful forum that can be able to lay a very, very strong foundation on continental integrity, continental unity in diversity, continental economic stability, and continental decision-making even at the global space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that really call for united voices, united in diversity. So We need to continue, and I hear you about more discussions that we'll have. This will continue until March, so we will continue to discuss this. Yes, let's now hear from Prof. Eddy on, so we're really talking real threats. Let's say we have, a nuclear power, yes, that we are being attacked, Prof. As a former African peer review mechanism boss, how would you advise the AU on this?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you because I don't have the answer to that question, but I can only refer you to history. It has happened already with Libya in 2011, but this one was done through a collective process at the UN with the Security Council taking a resolution 1973 on Libya, which was then taken over by NATO and interpreted differently. And then they ended up not just toppling. At least President Maduro is alive, is in the US. Colonel Gaddafi, they killed him. And then they not only killed him, they destroyed the country. And now we are still, Libya collapsed. Even up to today, Libya has not recovered. So what you're talking about has also happened. And what happened at that time was that the AU established a committee of heads of state. And this committee of heads of state tried to intervene, but even the committee itself was relying on foreign-funded logistics to intervene. I remember I was in the South African Foreign Service, so they were supposed to fly to this. They were using planes that were paid for by certain people, and those people said, don't use our funds to. So it goes to self-reliance. So to be able to make this kind of, we must have our own resources. We have the African Peace Fund, but this Peace Fund is, I think the majority of the funds come from outside our continent. And so if you were to ask me, Africa, diplomatically, yes, I think we can act. Pan-African solidarity, yes. And internationalism. Internationalism meaning building strategic alliances South-South and with certain countries. I think there we can do a lot. But deterrence, I'm not sure how much deterrence we have, capacity do we have, because we don't have three key ingredients for establishing deterrence. The first one, we don't have the military. African countries have militaries, and I was sitting when we were trying to establish something. It's a difficult situation. The US this year, financial year, their current funding, they have set aside $1 trillion for the military. We can't afford that, even collectively as an African continent. Even the Russia and all of that. So we don't have the army, we don't have the military power to repel an attack, to deter. We don't have, and no country in Africa has it. We have this and that, this and that, this and that. So deterrence, military, it's something that we must know. In that situation, we are probably in the same situation as the Venezuelans. And then other countries have been able to establish deterrence using nuclear weapons. But Africa, you know that we took a decision to declare Africa a nuclear-free zone with the Pelindaba Treaty. So no, and at that time, South Africa had some nuclear weapons inherited from the apartheid government, and we dismantled all of that. We only have nuclear technology for peaceful use. And so that's the second thing. And then, do we have the economy to support you could say, an assertive posture globally? We don't have. So no country in Africa, if a superpower were to come and say, we saw Nigeria was bombed, Nigeria couldn't retaliate. South Africa is in this difficult situation, is being told that it's killing white people, something that's not true, and it was kicked out of the G20. So this is the situation we are in. But how do you deal it? It's not a hopeless situation. It's not new. It has recurred many times in history. We were born, myself, I don't know how old you and my sister from Kenya are. I was born during the Cold War. So the Cold War, it was two powers. Then the Cold War ended. Then we had a unipolar environment. So we are just coming out of that unipolar period. We are now going into a period of great power rivalry. So we're going to have great power rivalry, most likely three powers: the US, Russia, and China. They are going to be, it can probably be 30 years or whatever. And all of us have to find our place in that situation, maybe alliances and so on and so on. So it's something that we have to do as a continent, but also at the country level, we have to apply our mind. How are you going to survive this period? But the actions that have been taken in Venezuela with also what is happening in Greenland, I think they are self-defeating. Because to go all out and defy a global system that has been in place since the Second World War, it's not sustainable, and it can only bring negative and unintended consequences to you. I think somebody who acts that way, because in statecraft there's something I've learned, that there is a reason why why states or governments don't do certain things. There's a reason why I don't go to church and stand up in a church and start pissing on the wall. There's no rule that say don't piss on the wall, but nobody does it. So once you start pissing on the wall and you show that you are tough, you don't care what. So the logic of karma will catch up with you, and it's also an expression of certain things that are probably happening. That this shift to and you try to assert yourself by trying to go for other countries. But remember, and I'm going to end there. Remember, madam, I've painted this. You could say. I can't say depressing, but this picture of Africa, that even if Nigeria was bombed, South Africa is that we are unable, we don't have that capacity for deterrence. We don't have that capacity to be engaging head on with a superpower. We just don't have, because of those three things: nuclear weapons, the economy, size of the economy, and a powerful military. No single African country has that capacity in those three areas. But it doesn't mean we are the only ones. Look at the Europeans. They have been told we are going to take Greenland, and I think they are in a much more painful situation than Africa, because Africa, we are not being targeted the way, but Europe is painful. You saw they are being treated like kids. So we're going into this period of it's not a some call it a multipolar system, but it's going to be a multipolar system that will be anchored around a great power rivalry, that powers fighting for, and then we are going to have regional anchors, regional days, alliances, and so on. There's a point at which, and that's the point that we are going into, there's a point at which the United States will be unable to impose its will on a number of countries. And I think now, by going for Greenland, going for this, they are trying to show their muscle, trying to claim that space, but they are moving to a point where there will be enough deterrence in the system that they will not be able to do certain things. And you can see with all the aggression, all the land grabbing, all of this thing, there are two countries that they are not going after: Russia and China. So it's already deterrence. So that's the system that we are moving into, and I don't think the US will be able to do this unilateral going around on its own and impose its will the way it's doing for a long time. I think in the next few years, countries will be able to maneuver and to find other ways of protecting themselves. So Africa will have to define ourselves in that. That's why I agree with the ambassador that we need to meet as Africans, like Ahmed Salim did in 1990 at the end of the Cold War. So we need to meet and say, how are we going to maneuver as a continent in this emerging global order of multipolarity anchored on the great power rivalry? How are we going? The non-aligned narrative is limited. We need to think more strategically and in more pragmatic sense. How are we going to organize ourselves? And you can see even that the future of the UN itself is at stake. Sorry I spoke too long. Thank you.
Can I ask for a minute to?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as we were doing our submission, I'm trying still to think what is the way forward, therefore, out of that very, very strategic question on the level of preparedness of the continent in the event of an external threat. So key action points: number one, strengthen continental unity and diplomatic coordination, because a collective diplomatic strategy makes it harder for external powers to divide and pressure individual countries in the continent. So we must strengthen our continental unity and diplomatic coordination. Number two, as a continent, let us build resilient on domestic institutions. Because of time, I'll just put them like in point form without really getting deeper. And then number three, let us invest in economic autonomy and financial resilience, like what my brother has alluded to. Number four, let us enhance as a continent our security cooperation and early warning systems. Do we have any early warning systems in the continent in the event of such? Look at Venezuela. Did they have any early warning systems that could have alerted the president? So number five, and the final one, we must promote peace, domestic and political dialogue. And I said earlier, this is the first strategic meeting towards convening a continental dialogue towards promoting territorial peace, integrity, and strengthening of the nations of Africa. Thank you.
Wow, those recommendations, and I think we're gonna try to get even another session where we could, go into more details, because the 5 points that you gave are actually six. They're actually very, very important. The diplomatic coordination, investment, and finance. But talking about finance, I think, Prof, you really spoke quite a lot about finance. And I think this will be also for both of you. Just think while I'll go into the chat and just read some comments. The next question to you would be the dependency of the AU when it comes to finance, because it feels like we're depending externally. And what was depressing for me while Prof was talking was actually all the 3 points, and the last one being economically we are not capable. That is kind of a bit depressing. I'm sure every African will feel, how about the resources that we do have? But hold that thought while I just read some comments in the chat so everybody can feel that they're part of the conversation. Right. So Prof. Banji says, humbly stating that the US has many military bases in African continent and has already bombarded Nigeria, claiming it's aimed at terrorists. Our continent is rich in natural resources, and one can never know when it can be targeted. Well, that is a comment from Tanzania. Then, meanwhile, again, Ambassador Banji said, meanwhile, Starlink of the US has its eyes monitoring every activity 24 hours. Sarah Tiago said, we need to be more united to be a stronger and be able to protect our continent. The most critical situation in Africa is we are not united. John says, Africa is working to build one economy. How it comes that Africa neglect to build a military power to protect its people and its wealth as AU. I think Prof will assist us with that. How come we have the economy? Oh yeah, I think, yeah, right. So at the same context, can Africa now think of a nuclear weapon? I think Prof has already answered that we have a treaty that we can, but I think we still need to debate. Is that treaty final, or we can review it? Because the way the world is going, we need to be careful. Ian says, no country will nuke Africa, but we must be able to protect our countries. Then Ian says again, Trump is a bully, simple, and the UN is toothless organization that talks but takes no action. We should look to an amazing example, Burkina Faso, that we must all follow. Even the way the President Traoré built relationships with his neighbors, Mali and Niger. And he continues, we need really real leadership based on values, basic human values. Then start working together for the good of each of the 54 countries and the entire continent. Time to remove colonial armies from all African countries. Without unity, there is no growth for the continent. I think let's read this last one from Sarah. Absolutely, unity is the main important thing. I agree that what is happening in Burkina Faso, people are judging him, but what he's doing is good for the continent. Our countries need independence from external forces. So those are the comments. So any response to some of these comments, Prof, before we go to finances?
I thought you were concluding. Thank you very much.
It's
a long discussion. No, I think the ambassador has already given us some food for thought. The kind of areas where we can look at. I can only say that what she suggested also earlier is what a number of people have been talking about, that Africa needs to meet under one roof and look and have this discussion, and then to say what is it, how do we respond, and even these comments that we make and can then be fed into that kind of gathering. What are the things that we can do? Currently, we have not had countries individually. They are traumatized dealing with this situation. Everybody's worried. How am I going to survive? You have people knocking on your door. They say, we want your minerals. Your neighbors can't protect you. They are forcing you to have agreements, to sign this, to say, give us exclusive rights. So this is the environment we are in now. But I don't think it will last very long. It will last. It's just symptomatic of what we have seen in the past. But for us to, I think the US is getting itself into a situation where more and more countries will not trust it, and the world will get used to going on with their business without the US. So by withdrawing from the UN, and so that's the mistake that they are doing. By tariffs, countries will get used to trading and continuing to trade without the US. So they are putting themselves in a situation where they are disengaging and decoupling from the world, but it's in the medium to long term. It can only be to their detriment, because everybody needs everybody. There is a reason, like I said, there's a reason why people don't stand up in church and go and start piecing on the wall, even if it's not written, don't piece on the wall. So they are doing things that countries don't do. And there's a reason countries don't do those things. So by doing those things, you get yourself in, and they are behaving in a way that countries don't behave in the international system. There is a little bit of minimum respect of certain rules, written and unwritten. And once you defy that, you start doing as you wish. It can only be to your detriment. But as Africans, Ambassador, you are right. Let's sit down and let's have this kind of discussion. States and non-state actors, to say how do, because we are most likely to be in this situation, maybe 20 years, 30 years. And the issue of the nuclear weapons, you see how North Korea uses it. Every time there's some activity in the Middle East and somebody's been threatened, when President Maduro was, then they do their own nuclear tests. So some countries have managed to do that, to use nuclear weapons to protect themselves. Those that don't have, you end up in certain situations. So I'm not saying Africa should review its Pelindaba Treaty, but I'm saying that Africa needs to have this conversation to say, how do we move forward? How do we reorganize ourselves? Are we properly constituted to be dealing with this? And we are going to be in this great power rivalry situation, probably 20, 30 years. That's the kind of tendency we see in historical patterns or historical cycles. So I don't know. I don't have the answers to those questions. They are quite difficult, but I think those are the answers that we must answer and confront collectively as African people. So thank you very much. You say we are done now.
No, not at all. Not at all. We still have to deal with the finance issue. Just one last question will be on finance.
Okay,
but let's first just have a comment from Ambassador on all the comments that were in the chat. If you have any response from the comment from the chat. You are muted, Ambassador.
Sorry for that. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Beautiful. I was saying, what I'm saying is that all the comments are all geared towards the 5 key recommendations that we have proposed today for action. So I salute all our participants and listeners, and I think I don't have much to comment, but basically, if you look at and listen to each one of them, it's like they are giving a signature, and that we certify, and we unanimously agreed that we proceed forward with the 5 key recommendation action points out of this particular summit. And key unity of the continent is key.
That's great. I'm sure we'll have a session just on those recommendations. Now let's move to finance, because this is actually quite a sensitive but very critical issue that was raised even in previous sessions that we have. Can an externally funded securities architecture ever be independent? Prof, because you say, yes, we do have the architecture, the security architecture, but as we know it, is that the AU relies heavily on external donors, for peace and security. Is that architecture reliable?
Well, it's in transition, it's evolving. The approach I take is that, remember, there was a time when something didn't exist. When it exists and it's imperfect, we must always appreciate the progress we've made. So what we should be doing is to say, how do we improve it moving forward, rather than throwing stones at it? Because the architecture is there. It has achieved a lot, but of course, as you say, it's still externally dependent. Even at the level of institutions, their programs. The AU overall is externally a dependent organization. But the good news there is that it is acknowledged within the African Union, and there were several attempts in the past to deal with the issue of self-financing. There was a panel which was led by President Obasanjo some time ago. He came up with some basket of options, what was called then basket of options, but it's the countries themselves that were uncomfortable. One of them was to introduce a tourism levy, and some countries said no. And I remember President Obasanjo say, "Are you saying $1 will discourage tourists from coming to Africa?" And so, but it didn't. And now President Kagame, under the reforms, he also came up with his own initiatives under Dr. Kaweruka, a package of some attempts to try to deal with the issue of self-financing. So it's still on the table. ECOWAS has dealt with it somehow in its own context. They have the ECOWAS levy, I think. And but in the African Union, we don't have, the African Union does not have its own self-financing mechanism. It has a financing mechanism that relies on member states' contributions, and then of course partner funding. It doesn't have its own. Like the European Union, in addition to member states' contribution, has its own self-financing instruments like the levy, the duties, quite a number of instruments that enables the European Union to collect revenue outside, of course, in member states, but outside on its own. So these are instruments agreed to by members. So in Africa, there is a lot of resistance, just import duties and so on. African countries are resisting. Tourism levy, African countries are resisting, and so on. But I think it's doable. There are other options that I think we can look at moving forward that require us a bit of creativity. to see how Africa can be able, the African Union can have, let's say the African Union can start by raising just, even if it's just 100 million from its own instruments and towards trying to work towards $1 billion. At the moment, the budget of the African Union, I think it's about 300 million US dollars, which is very minuscule. And compared to what we want to achieve. And much of it is financed by partners. African peer review mechanism, where I was administrative and operating, were covered by AU, but the programs are done by partners funding. So it's the same you find in other organs as well. It's unsustainable. But we need to find, the African Union needs to find its own instruments for self-financing, because the member states' contribution is good. Member states are paying, but even it's based on the principle that they call affordability and African solidarity. So 5 countries account for the bulk of the funding coming from member states: South Africa, Egypt, Morocco. Now it used to be Libya, Nigeria, and which one is the 5th one now? But there are 5 countries, Algeria. So it's a formula that was agreed to when you were transitioning to the AU, and then there's a second tier, there's a third tier. So the majority of African countries, it's only those 5 countries that carried, and they themselves, since the COVID-19, they are trying to pull back, they are reducing their commitments, and so on because of the domestic pressures. So it's a member state contribution. The future of it has to be in such a way that the 5 are there, maybe even go higher, but the others move up and join the 5 in terms of their own contribution to the coffers of the AU. But the AU as a body must find its own instrument, something like a tax, something like a levy, something. It doesn't have to be those kind of instruments, but must have its own instruments for self-financing. And there are different, we can sit and try to brainstorm, but the others that were tried in the past were rejected by member states. So what I'm saying is not because of lack of effort that we're in this situation. It's a dynamic, it's ongoing dynamic, but overall what I'm trying to say is that my approach to this kind of things is that if you didn't have something in the past 10 years ago, now you have it today, you must always appreciate that progress and look at it positively and see what can you learn and how do you move forward. So you don't spend your time crying and complaining and say, oh, this one doesn't do this one. No, the question is that now you have it, it's better than not having it at all. How do we move forward? So that's the approach I will take. And I think the proposals put forward by our sister in Kenya are quite constructive. And since this is my last opportunity to share or to say something for people to hear my voice, whatever, if it's any voice at all. Let me, madam, thank you very much for putting us together and pulling us out of our very hectic Friday to be part of this. And also my sister in Kenya, Nairobi, and I see they say you are a presidential candidate.
Yes.
I wish you all the best. It's very tough in Africa to campaign to be a president, and Kenya is very dynamic. I always enjoy being there, and the independent mindedness of Kenyan people, and of course the dynamism that is always there with the elections in Kenya. So we can only pray for you and wish you the best, and they will let the best person win. Whoever wins is always in the interest of Africa. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
Wow. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. It was really just great to hear that security without solidarity is actually be vulnerable. So thank you for bringing that perspective and just highlighting the suggestions that Ambassador brought, which you will have even a session where we can go deeper and discuss on them. So before I let everyone go, though, I just want to have a final a word, which is really a call for support. RWA is a self-funded social enterprise, so we therefore invite everyone to support us through membership. You can sign up as a member. You can become a paid subscriber on Substack. We produce a weekly article on Substack, and on 14th to 17th of April, we'll have a leaders retreat in Cape Town. Please register for that. All the links will be in the chat. And we are also hosting our annual summit in Tanzania this year from 1st to 7th of May in Dar es Salaam. It's a high-profile event for male and female leaders with the award. So we would like to invite you to save the date and follow us on all our social media. Next week, Friday, we have this every Friday. We'll have episode 4 that will be looking at, we will continue the security issues, but we'll focus more on the DRC and Sudan, why it's an ending conflict. So until then, let's continue, let's keep the conversation going on, and let's again join next Friday for another session. And if you are an expert, please join us or register because we're still looking for speakers. Thank you so much for all your contribution, and we look forward for more discussions and conversation that take Africa forward. Thank you so much, everyone.